He spat in my face, but I refused to give him the satisfaction. Royal Guard Thomas Blackwood's words are shaking the internet. But it's the moment leading up to this statement that's truly unforgettable. The sun beat down on Buckingham Palace, its golden rays reflecting off the ornate gates and casting long shadows across the courtyard. Tourists gathered, their excited chatter and camera clicks creating a buzzing atmosphere of anticipation. In this timeless scene of British tradition, one figure stood out like a garish neon sign against an oil painting. Kevin Reynolds, a wealthy American tourist, strutted through the crowd with an air of entitlement. His designer sunglasses perched atop his perfectly coiffed hair, and his crisp linen suit screamed of luxury. As he approached the front, his eyes locked onto Thomas Blackwood, a royal guard standing at attention. "Hey, buddy," Kevin called out, his voice carrying a hint of mockery. "You gonna move for me or what?" The guard remained motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Kevin's brow furrowed, annoyance crossing his face. He wasn't used to being ignored. As time passed, Kevin's frustration grew. He paced back and forth, occasionally glancing at Blackwood, who stood as still as a statue. The American's body language became increasingly agitated, his gestures more exaggerated. "Come on, man. Give us a smile," Kevin taunted, stepping closer. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" He waved his hand in front of Blackwood's face, but the guard's expression remained impassive. Inside, Blackwood's mind churned. Years of training had prepared him for this, but the tourist's audacity tested his resolve. He focused on his breathing, recalling the generations of his family who had worn this uniform with pride. Each memory strengthened his determination. Kevin's friends gathered around, smartphones raised to capture the scene. "Show him what you're made of, Kev!" one shouted, egging him on. The crowd's reaction began to shift. What had started as mild amusement at Kevin's antics was now turning to discomfort. Parents pulled their children closer, and hushed whispers of disapproval spread. Kevin, oblivious to the changing atmosphere, pressed on. He mimicked the guard's stance, exaggerating the stiffness. "Look at me, I'm a big, strong guard," he mocked, his voice high-pitched and nasal. "I'm so important, I can't even blink." Blackwood's jaw clenched imperceptibly. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, a mix of sympathy and curiosity. The weight of his duty pressed down on him, each second a test of his training and character. Kevin, growing increasingly frustrated, leaned in close, his breath hot on Blackwood's face. "You know what? I bet you're not even real, just a robot in a fancy hat." The tension in the air was palpable. The crowd held its collective breath, sensing that a line was about to be crossed. Kevin's friends continued to film, their excitement building. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. Kevin's face contorted with a mix of anger and contempt. He drew back slightly, his lips curling into a sneer. Then, in a shocking display of disrespect, he spat directly onto Blackwood's face. The crowd gasped in unison. A woman screamed, and several people shouted in outrage. Kevin's friends whooped and hollered, their cameras capturing every second of the despicable act. The saliva dripped slowly down Blackwood's cheek, a glistening trail of insult. Yet against all odds, the guard remained motionless. His eyes didn't waver, his stance didn't falter. It was as if the act of aggression had simply bounced off an impenetrable shield of dignity. Kevin stood back, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. He turned to his friends, arms spread wide. But as he basked in his perceived victory, the crowd turned on him. Boos and jeers replaced the earlier excitement. "How dare you!" an elderly woman shouted, her voice quavering with emotion. "You should be ashamed of yourself," a man in a business suit added, his finger pointing accusingly at Kevin. The American's smug expression faltered as he realized the tide had turned against him. He looked around, suddenly aware of the disapproving faces surrounding him. His friends lowered their phones, uncertainty replacing their excitement. Local police officers quickly moved in. "Sir, we're going to have to ask you to come with us," one said firmly. Kevin's bravado crumbled. "Wait, what?" "You can't be serious! It was just a joke!" he sputtered, his voice losing its earlier confidence. As the police led Kevin away, the crowd's attention turned back to Blackwood. The guard remained at his post, his posture perfect, his gaze unwavering. The saliva on his cheek had begun to dry, leaving a faint, shimmering trail, a testament to his incredible self-control. As the saliva dried on Blackwood's cheek, a battle raged beneath his stoic exterior. The guard's unwavering stance spoke volumes, but his silence concealed a storm. Behind those steady eyes lay a history that would make even the bravest soul tremble. Blackwood's military training had prepared him for moments like this. His impeccable uniform, a symbol of dedication and centuries of tradition, represented the unwavering commitment of those who had served before him. But now, it felt like a thin barrier against the tempest within. His mind drifted to Afghanistan. The scorching heat, the constant tension, the weight of responsibility, all of it had shaped him. He remembered the faces of his comrades, some of whom never made it home. Their sacrifices seemed to whisper to him now, reminding him of the honor he carried. Inside, Blackwood was a raging sea contained by a calm surface. Every fiber of his being screamed for action, for justice. He wanted nothing more than to reach out and teach this arrogant tourist a lesson in respect. But his training held firm, like a dam holding back a flood of emotions. The psychological impact was immense. It required not just physical discipline, but mental fortitude to withstand insults and attempts to break character. Blackwood focused on his breathing, on the weight of his uniform, on the honor of his position. Each breath was a battle won against his instincts. As palace security moved through the crowd, Blackwood's thoughts turned to the rules governing his role. Royal guards were expected to remain motionless and silent, embodying dignity and honor regardless of provocations. In that moment, he wasn't just Thomas Blackwood. He was a symbol of something greater than himself. The internal struggle between duty and the desire for retaliation highlighted the emotional toll such provocations could take. Blackwood was trained to suppress his reactions, but he was still human. Every taunt, every insult, every act of disrespect left its mark, like invisible scars beneath his uniform. Reynolds' triumphant smirk had begun to falter. He had expected anger, retaliation, or at least a flicker of emotion from Blackwood. Instead, he was met with an unnerving stillness that seemed to grow more powerful with each passing second. The American's bravado crumbled in the face of such dignity. The crowd's reaction had shifted. What began as shock at Reynolds' audacious act now morphed into something else entirely. Sympathy rippled through the onlookers as they watched Blackwood, his composure unwavering despite the glistening trail on his cheek. They saw not just a guard, but a man of extraordinary self-control. As Blackwood's superior approached, the dynamic began to shift. The guard captain's presence seemed to electrify the air, promising some form of resolution to the tense standoff. Blackwood felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Would his restraint be rewarded, or would he face reprimand for allowing such disrespect to occur on his watch? In that moment of uncertainty, Blackwood realized that regardless of the outcome, he had already won a crucial battle, the one against himself. He had stood firm in the face of provocation, honoring his duty and the legacy of those who came before him. And in that silent victory, he found a strength that no insult could ever touch. The guard captain's arrival brought a sudden shift to the tense atmosphere. His commanding voice cut through the air. "Guard, stand down." The words hung heavy with implication. The crowd, phones still raised, held its collective breath. For a moment, stillness reigned. Then Blackwood moved. He pivoted slowly, his polished boots squeaking slightly on the pavement as he turned to face Reynolds. The air crackled with anticipation as Blackwood's gaze locked onto Reynolds. The once boisterous tourist seemed to shrink under the guard's steady stare. A beat passed, the silence stretching thin as a wire. Then Blackwood spoke. His voice carried an unexpected weight and authority that silenced even the whispers in the crowd. "Mr. Reynolds," he began, his tone measured and clear, "I'd like you to take a good look at this uniform." Reynolds blinked, caught off guard by the direct address. He opened his mouth as if to retort, but no words came out. Blackwood continued, his words deliberate and powerful. "This isn't a costume, sir. It's a symbol of dedication that you clearly cannot comprehend." The statement hung in the air, a stark contrast to the earlier jeers and taunts. As Blackwood spoke, the crowd's demeanor began to shift. The earlier amusement at Reynolds' antics faded, replaced by a growing respect for the guard's composure and wisdom. Blackwood's words painted a vivid picture of sacrifice and duty that many in the audience had never considered. "I've stood guard in places where the threat wasn't just disrespect, but danger," Blackwood explained, his voice carrying hints of experiences far beyond the palace grounds. "I've watched over my brothers and sisters in arms, knowing that our vigilance meant the difference between life and death." Reynolds' bravado continued to crumble as Blackwood's words hit home. The tourist's face, once flushed with arrogance, now paled with the realization of the depth of his misconduct. Blackwood's speech took an unexpected turn as he addressed not just Reynolds, but the broader issues at play. "Some traditions deserve respect, even if you don't understand them," he stated, his words resonating with many in the crowd who had never considered the deeper meaning behind the guard's stoic presence. As Blackwood spoke, phones lowered and eyes focused solely on him. The guard's words were weaving a tapestry of understanding, bridging the gap between the ceremonial nature of his current post and the very real sacrifices it represented. "Standing here isn't just about guarding a building or upholding a tradition," Blackwood explained, his voice carrying a hint of passion beneath its disciplined exterior. "It's about being a living reminder of the values we hold dear: discipline, honor, and respect." The crowd listened in rapt attention, many nodding in agreement. Blackwood's unexpected eloquence was transforming the atmosphere from one of tension to one of reflection. "When you mock this uniform," Blackwood continued, his gaze still fixed on Reynolds, "you're not just disrespecting me. You're disrespecting every man and woman who has ever put on a uniform to serve their country and protect others." Reynolds's earlier cockiness had completely evaporated. He stood, shoulders slumped, the weight of his actions visibly pressing down on him. Blackwood's words then took on a more personal tone. "I do hope that someday you'll understand what happened here. This isn't about you or me. It's about everything we guard here." The statement hung in the air, inviting everyone present to consider the deeper implications of the confrontation they had witnessed. As Blackwood's speech drew to a close, a profound silence settled over the crowd. The impact of his words was palpable, transforming what had begun as a spectacle into a moment of collective introspection. As Blackwood resumed his post, an electric silence settled over the crowd. The gravity of what had just transpired hung in the air, a palpable force that seemed to push against the onlookers. Reynolds, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions, stood rooted to the spot. The bravado that had fueled his actions moments ago had evaporated, leaving behind a shell of a man who was only now beginning to grasp the magnitude of his mistake. The silence was broken by the purposeful stride of approaching police officers. Their faces were stern, a clear indication that this was no laughing matter. One of the officers addressed Reynolds, his voice carrying to those nearby. "Assaulting a Queen's Guard is a serious offense, sir. You'll have plenty of time to reflect on Guard Blackwood's words while we process your case." The words fell like hammer blows, each one driving home the reality of Reynolds' situation. As the police began to lead him away, the crowd's murmurs grew louder, a tide of voices discussing what they had just witnessed. Social media platforms began to buzz with activity as videos of the incident spread rapidly. Comments poured in from all corners of the internet, with many expressing admiration for Blackwood's composure and eloquence. In the days that followed, a noticeable shift occurred in the behavior of visitors to Buckingham Palace. The usual cacophony of excited chatter and laughter was replaced by a more subdued atmosphere of respect and genuine curiosity. Tourists who had once seen the guards as little more than living statues now approached with a newfound sense of reverence. Tour guides reported an increase in questions about the history and traditions of the Royal Guards. Visitors were no longer content with surface-level information. They wanted to understand the depth of commitment required to stand guard in all weather conditions, the rigorous training process, and the historical significance of the role. The incident had sparked broader discussions about respect and tradition that extended far beyond the palace gates. In pubs and cafes across London, locals and tourists alike found themselves debating the merits of maintaining such time-honored traditions in a rapidly changing world. For Kevin Reynolds, the consequences of his actions were swift and severe. As he sat in a holding cell, the reality of his situation began to sink in. The judge's remarks during his sentencing were particularly poignant, emphasizing that his actions were an attack on the principles of duty, honor, and respect that the guards embody. As part of his sentence, Reynolds was required to perform community service at veterans organizations. This experience proved to be a profound wake-up call for the once arrogant tourist. He found himself face-to-face with men and women who had sacrificed much in service to their country, and their stories of bravery and dedication left an indelible mark on him. Months after the incident, Reynolds admitted in an interview that the community service had been a humbling experience that nothing in his privileged life had prepared him for. "I went in thinking I was above it all," he confessed, "but I came out with a deep respect for those who serve. Guard Blackwood's words haunt me to this day, and I'm grateful for the lesson, hard as it was to learn." The impact of the incident on future tourist behavior at Buckingham Palace was significant and long-lasting. Tourism officials reported a marked increase in respectful behavior towards the guards. Visitors were observed maintaining a respectful distance, speaking in hushed tones, and actively discouraging any disruptive behavior from their fellow tourists. Parents began taking a more active role in educating their children about the significance of the guards. Rather than encouraging their little ones to try and make the guards smile or laugh, they explained the importance of the guards' role and the values they represented. The shallow jokes that had once been commonplace were replaced by genuine interest and thoughtful questions. As the crowd at Buckingham Palace dispersed, Blackwood's words were just beginning their journey. Within hours, his speech would reach millions, challenging perceptions and igniting debates far beyond the palace gates. The video of the incident spread across social media platforms like ripples in still water. Multiple angles captured the moment, each highlighting the stark contrast between Reynolds' arrogance and Blackwood's dignified response. As views skyrocketed into the millions, comment sections buzzed with passionate discussions. One viral comment encapsulated the prevailing sentiment. "This is what real strength looks like, standing firm in the face of disrespect. That speech should be played in schools, tradition, honor, duty, values we need more than ever." The words resonated with countless others, sparking conversations about true courage and civility in an increasingly divided world. As the video gained traction, Reynolds' identity was quickly unveiled. The consequences were swift and severe. His online profiles were flooded with criticism, and exclusive London clubs quietly revoked his membership. The man who had arrived as a wealthy tourist found himself a social outcast overnight. Meanwhile, Blackwood's composed demeanor struck a chord with people around the globe. His unexpected eloquence transformed him from a silent symbol to a vocal advocate for dignity and duty. Social media feeds buzzed with discussions about respect, tradition, and the values that bind society together. The incident's impact reached far beyond online discourse. Schools began incorporating the video into their curricula, using it as a springboard for discussions about civics and ethics. Children, moved by Blackwood's words, penned heartfelt letters to Buckingham Palace. One such letter, written in a child's careful script, read, "Dear Guard. Blackwood, today you taught us that being strong doesn't mean being mean. Sometimes the strongest thing is to be kind and respectful, even when others are not." These innocent yet profound reflections served as a poignant reminder of the incident's far-reaching impact. Military and law enforcement training programs began using the video as a case study in maintaining composure under pressure. Blackwood's response became a textbook example of asserting authority through character rather than force. Trainers emphasized the power of words and demeanor in diffusing potentially volatile situations. Public figures and celebrities weighed in, amplifying the conversation. Actors known for playing tough guys praised Blackwood's restraint as true strength. Political leaders found rare common ground in commending the guard's poise. Even sports stars shared the video with captions about real courage and discipline. The incident's long-term impact on public discourse was profound. Conversations about respect and duty permeated everyday life. People began to reflect on their own behavior, questioning how they treated others in service positions or those tasked with maintaining order. Tourism officials in London reported a marked shift in visitor behavior. The once common sight of tourists attempting to provoke a reaction from the guards became increasingly rare. Instead, visitors approached with newfound reverence, often taking time to learn about the guard's history and significance. As for Reynolds, the consequences of his behavior extended far beyond social media backlash. The legal system took a dim view of his actions, and during his sentencing, the judge's remarks were particularly pointed. "Mr. Reynolds," the judge intoned, "your actions that day were not merely an assault on an individual. They were an attack on the principles of duty, honor, and respect that Guard Blackwood and his colleagues represent. These are the very foundations upon which civil society is built." The sentence handed down included a substantial fine and mandatory community service with veterans organizations. It was a deliberate choice, designed to bring Reynolds face to face with the reality of service and sacrifice. Blackwood's response became a powerful lesson in dignity and restraint, resonating beyond Buckingham Palace and challenging observers to reconsider their reactions to disrespect. In a world of noise and impulsive responses, his measured silence spoke volumes, showcasing personal strength and royal guard values. The incident sparked discussions on respect, duty, and the power of restraint. As the story spread, it raised a question: how might we respond to provocation with similar grace? Blackwood's unwavering composure became a case study in modern civility, reminding us that actions often speak louder than words when facing adversity. His dignified response not only exemplified personal strength, but also reinforced the enduring values of tradition and respect.